My brother stood in my kitchen clutching a half-empty coffee mug and dropped the sentence that still echoes in my head. Look, you've always made more money than me. You can help with the mortgage now that the market turned. The same brother who had secretly sold the house I built for our mother, brick by brick, paycheck by paycheck, was now asking me to save him from foreclosure. I didn't shout. I just looked at him and thought, this is the bill I'll never pay. My name is Andrew Miller, 36 years old, a structural engineer who still believes in blueprints, not just for buildings, but for life itself. 15 years ago, when my dad passed, our family was left with grief and little else. The life insurance barely covered funeral expenses. My mom, Ellen, was suddenly a widow in her 50s, working double shifts at the hospital cafeteria just to keep the lights on. I was in my 20s then, fresh out of college, earning entry-level wages but full of determination. I promised her that one day she wouldn't have to worry about rent ever again. It took me nearly 6 years of saving every bonus, every overtime check, and living like a monk. While my friends splurged on new cars and vacations, I kept driving a rusty Honda and eating bulk pasta. By the time I turned 28, I had scraped together enough for a down payment on a small piece of land outside of Denver. I designed the house myself. Not grand, not magazine cover material, but solid. 2 stories, modest brickwork, a porch my mom always dreamed of, and a kitchen big enough for family dinners. I remember the day she first stepped inside. Her hands trembled against the freshly painted banister. She whispered, "This is too much, Andrew." I don't deserve this. I told her it wasn't a gift. It was a promise kept. For years afterwards, she filled that house with warmth. Sunday stews simmering on the stove, her laughter echoing from the porch swing, the scent of fresh laundry drifting through open windows. And then there was Michael, my younger brother, 3 years behind me. Michael was always the charmer, the risk-taker. While I built stability brick by brick, he floated from job to job, always chasing the next big thing. A startup one year, real estate license the next, crypto obsession after that. He had charisma, no doubt, but zero follow-through. Still, Mom adored him. "He just needs time," she'd say, as if life were a race he hadn't quite started. For years, I covered small gaps for him. A late car payment, rent when his roommate bailed, even groceries during one particularly bad winter. Mom would look at me with pleading eyes, and I'd step in. I thought it was temporary. I thought he'd eventually find his footing. I never imagined the house I built for Mom, the one place in this world I thought was untouchable, would become Michael's bargaining chip. Because one day, without my knowledge, he convinced her to transfer paperwork for tax purposes. In reality, he had maneuvered her into signing over partial rights. By the time I uncovered the truth, it was too late. The house was sold. Mom ended up in a rented condo with beige carpets and no porch swing. And Michael? He pocketed the profits, bought a bigger place for himself, and now, just a few years later, stood in my kitchen asking me to bail him out. That's where my story begins. The first cracks didn't appear the day Michael sold the house. Looking back, they had been forming for years, subtle hairline fractures in the foundation of trust I thought we shared. It started small, the way these things always do. I'd drive up to Mom's place on weekends to mow the lawn or fix whatever needed attention. She'd greet me at the porch, apron still dusted with flour, and say, "Michael stopped by yesterday. He had such big plans, Andrew. He's going to start flipping properties." Her voice carried that same pride she used to have when I won my first engineering award. Only this time, it was for promises, not results. I didn't mind at first. That's who Michael was, an idea man. But over time, the stories grew stranger. He was helping streamline Mom's finances. He was researching better investment structures. One afternoon, I noticed a pile of mail stacked neatly on the counter. Letters from banks, thick envelopes stamped with words like mortgage options and equity loan proposal. "Why are these here?" I asked. "Oh, Michael's just looking them over for me," Mom said, as if this was perfectly normal. "He says there are smarter ways to handle the property." I remember standing in that kitchen, my hands still stained with grease from fixing her porch railing, and feeling something tighten in my chest. Mom had always leaned on me for the practical things, bills, repairs, planning, but now she was quoting Michael like he was the expert. A week later, I stopped by unannounced. Michael's car was in the driveway, shiny new tires he definitely couldn't afford on his freelancing gigs. Inside, they were huddled at the dining table. Papers spread out, Mom's handwriting on sticky notes, Michael tapping a pen against the margin like some corporate consultant. They stopped talking when I entered. "Hey, Drew," Michael said casually, too casually. "Just helping Mom sort through some paperwork. You know, boring stuff." Mom smiled nervously, folding a document too quickly, tucking it into a manila folder. It wasn't like them to keep me out of family matters, not here, not in the house I'd built. That night, driving home, I told myself I was being paranoid. But deep down, I knew Michael wasn't just circling, he was planning. And the house, my mother's home, was already caught in his orbit. The following months felt like being slowly written out of a story I had helped author. Every weekend, I still showed up, tightening hinges, resealing windows, replacing shingles. But it was as if the house was no longer mine to touch. Michael had inserted himself into every conversation, every decision. Mom started saying things like, "Michael says we should refinance," or "Michael says I don't need to worry about the property taxes anymore, he'll handle it." The words stung in ways I couldn't quite admit out loud. Because wasn't I the one who built this place? Not just with blueprints and hammers, but with long nights and calloused hands? Wasn't I the one who took overtime jobs through my 20s just so I could pour concrete footings for a woman who never asked for anything except a safe place to call her own? One Saturday, I came by with new kitchen tiles I'd picked out. Mom had always wanted a brighter backsplash. But when I pulled into the driveway, Michael's SUV was parked sideways like he owned the place. Inside, boxes littered the hallway. Catalogs of luxury appliances were stacked on the counter. Mom's old oak dining table was pushed against the wall, and in its place, Michael had spread glossy brochures. "Andrew," Mom said, startled. She quickly shut a binder. Michael leaned back in the chair, arms folded like a king in his court. "We're just exploring some options," he said. "Don't worry about it." "Options for what?" I asked, forcing calm. "Expanding equity. Modernizing. You wouldn't understand. It's financial strategy." He grinned in that way he always did when he wanted to remind me I was the practical one, the laborer, while he was the visionary. I wanted to argue, to demand answers. But Mom's eyes flicked nervously between us, and I swallowed it down. Weeks later, my phone buzzed with a text from a cousin. "Congrats on the house deal." "Didn't know you guys were selling." I drove straight to Mom's. Michael's car wasn't there. Mom sat at the kitchen table, a contract in her trembling hands. "Michael said this is for the best," she whispered, as though admitting a crime. "The market's hot right now. He says we'll have more flexibility if we sell." The words clattered around in my skull. We'll have more flexibility. But there was no we. There was only her and the home that carried every nail I had driven, every night I had sacrificed. That's when I realized the truth. Michael wasn't just circling anymore. He had already sunk his claws in, and if I didn't act soon, the house I built for Mom would slip through our fingers entirely. It happened on a Tuesday morning, as so many betrayals do, quietly, in plain daylight, without any dramatic thunderclap. I was on a job site downtown when my phone rang. It was the county clerk's office confirming the transfer of deed for the Martinez property. My name wasn't on their system anymore. My jaw went slack, the wrench in my hand slipping against the bolt. By the time I got to Mom's, the driveway was half empty. The flower beds I had built along the porch looked trampled, dirt kicked up where moving boxes had been dragged. Mom sat inside on the couch, wringing her hands, a brittle smile plastered across her face, like she was trying to convince herself this was fine. "It's done," she said before I even asked. Her voice was faint. "The buyers signed this morning." Michael handled everything. I just stood there, the air buzzing in my ears. "Done? You sold the house?" "Michael said it was too much upkeep for me," she whispered. "He promised I could stay with him for a while. Until things settle." Until things settle. Like the house was just another stock to flip, not the place where she had raised two sons, where Dad's framed photo still hung in the hallway. The papers sat on the coffee table, bold black letters, numbers, signatures. And there, tucked neatly into the stack, was Michael's name as primary seller. He had convinced Mom to sign over her share months earlier to simplify taxes. I hadn't even known. He had been planning this all along. I sank into the opposite chair. Every nail I had hammered into those walls, every late-night trip to Home Depot, every overtime shift I'd pulled so Mom wouldn't have to worry, it all meant nothing now. Mom reached for my hand. "Please don't be angry with your brother. He said it would help everyone help." The word twisted inside me like a knife. Help who? Certainly not Mom, who now sat displaced in her own living room. Certainly not me, who had given blood and years into building what was just sold like an unwanted car. That evening, I drove past the house again. The porch light I'd wired myself flickered as strangers carried furniture through the door. They didn't know the story of those beams, or the blistered palms that had held them up. They just saw a house with good bones. I parked across the street, hands clenched on the steering wheel, and let the weight of it crush me. Michael had sold the house I built for Mom. And the worst part? He hadn't even told me until it was too late. The truth was no longer a suspicion, no longer an uneasy feeling in my gut. It was a fact signed in ink. The legacy I thought I was leaving behind was gone, cashed out by my own brother. The call came 2 nights later. Michael's number flashed on my screen, and for a moment I thought maybe, just maybe, he would apologize, or at least try to explain. "Andrew," he said, his voice brisk, businesslike. "I need to talk to you about the mortgage." I almost laughed. "The what?" "The house I bought." "For Mom," he said, as if that somehow justified everything. "Look, the market's complicated right now. Interest rates are high, payments are rougher than I expected. I figured, since you've always been the steady one, you could cover part of it until things even out." I gripped the phone tighter, my knuckles white. "You sold the house I built for her. The house I poured every paycheck and weekend into. And now you're calling me to help you pay for the one you bought to replace it?" He exhaled loudly, the kind of sigh he used when we were kids, and he thought I was being overly dramatic. "Come on, Andrew. Don't make this about pride. It's family. We've always carried the load together." "No," I said, each word sharp, clipped. "We haven't. I carried it. You watched." There was silence on his end. Then colder. "So, that's it? You're just going to leave Mom in the middle of this?" That one hit where he knew it would hurt. Because Mom was living in his house now, her home sold, her security stripped, and Michael dangled her well-being like a bargaining chip. "She didn't ask me for this," I said, my throat tight. "You did." But guilt is a cunning thing. That night, lying awake in my apartment, I thought about Mom unpacking her boxes into a spare room at Michael's, how she'd probably smile through it all, telling herself this was fine. My anger twisted into shame, then into something heavier. Helplessness. When I drove over the next weekend, Mom hugged me like nothing had happened. The kitchen smelled of lemon cleaner and cardboard, not home. Michael strutted in with a stack of bills, placing them deliberately on the table. "Utilities, mortgage, groceries. We can split 3 ways," he said. "3 ways?" I asked. "You, me, and Mom," he replied. "Fair's fair." Mom lowered her eyes, her fingers tightening on her teacup. She wasn't going to argue, she never did. I looked at the numbers, payments bigger than my rent, bigger than anything I could realistically spare, and felt the walls close in. He had boxed me in perfectly. Sell the house I built, move Mom into his, and then guilt me into keeping his roof over her head. Walking back to my truck that afternoon, I felt more alone than I had in years. Not just betrayed, isolated. The house was gone. The legacy was gone. And somehow, in Michael's story, I was still the one expected to pay for it. The breaking point came on a gray Sunday afternoon. Michael had called again, this time with an edge in his voice. "You've been dodging me," he said. "Mom says you haven't chipped in yet." What's the holdup? I stared at the phone in my hand, the old familiar anger sparking. But when I spoke, my voice came out calm, almost level. "I didn't dodge you. I've been thinking. And the answer is no." There was a beat of silence. "No? Andrew, this isn't optional. We're family. You don't just say no to family." "I did last night." And I'm saying it again right now. I drove over anyway, not to argue, but to look him in the eye. Mom sat in the living room when I walked in, knitting something small and blue, her eyes darting nervously between us. Michael leaned against the counter, arms crossed like a man about to negotiate a deal. "You're late," he said. "Bills are due tomorrow." I slid into a chair at the kitchen table, the same table I'd eaten dinners at as a kid, the same one where Dad once taught us how to balance a checkbook. I let the silence stretch until Michael shifted uncomfortably. "You sold the house I built for Mom," I began slowly. "You did it without telling me, without even asking. Then you used her as leverage to make me pay for the one you bought in its place. That's not family, that's extortion with better manners." His face flushed. "Big words don't change reality. The mortgage still needs paying. You think you're better than me because you swung a hammer for a year? Because you poured concrete on weekends? I was the one making money overseas, Andrew. Don't forget who sent checks when you were barely scraping by." I leaned forward, my hands flat on the table. "You sent checks. I built a home. There's a difference." He opened his mouth, but I raised a hand. My voice was steady, measured. "This is my last favor, Michael. And that favor was letting you sell what I built without burning every bridge between us. I won't give you money for this mortgage. I won't be the safety net you keep tearing holes in. If you can't afford your house, that's your problem. Not mine. Not Mom's." For the first time, his bluster faltered. He looked toward Mom, maybe hoping she'd intervene, but she just kept knitting, her jaw tight. "You'll regret this," he muttered finally. "When Mom suffers because you couldn't put aside your pride." I stood, cutting him off. "No. Mom suffers because you traded her home for a mortgage you can't carry. Don't you dare lay that on me." The room went still. My chair scraped against the tile as I pushed it back. I bent down and kissed Mom's forehead. "I love you," I whispered. Then to Michael I added, "But I'm done." And for once in my life, I walked out without offering to fix what he'd broken. A year slipped by. Seasons turned, work piled up, and somewhere along the way, the weight that had once clung to me, the endless responsibility, the gnawing guilt, started to fall away. I moved into a modest but bright apartment closer to the firm. The rent wasn't cheap, but it was mine. No one asked me to pay their bills there. No one looked at me like an ATM disguised as a younger brother. On weekends, I drove out to the coast with friends from work, or sometimes just on my own, windows down, letting the air tangle in my hair. Life wasn't glamorous, but it was mine, and that was enough. Mom called sometimes. Her voice always carried a tremor, as though half apology, half defense. She never outright said it, but I pieced together the truth. The mortgage payments had buried Michael deeper than he ever expected. He'd missed 2 already, then 3. Collection letters started arriving. Hannah, his fiancée, had left months ago, taking whatever furniture she'd picked out for the dream house. One evening, Mom let it slip. "He's talking about moving back in with me. Says the bank's circling. I don't know what to do." I swallowed hard. The instinct to fix things tugged at me, the same old reflex that had defined my whole life. But then I remembered that kitchen table, his red face, his voice telling me I'd regret not saving him. And I realized something simple. I hadn't regretted it once. So I told Mom gently, "You don't have to take him in. You've done enough for him. He's a grown man. He'll figure it out, or he won't. But it's not yours to carry." She sighed, not arguing, just tired. "I wish you two could see eye to eye again." "We never will," I said softly. "But I hope one day you see who's been holding the weight all along." By spring, Michael's house was on the market. Rumor was he'd defaulted and the bank had forced his hand. I never asked for details, I didn't need them. For once, the fallout wasn't mine to clean. And then, one afternoon in April, I drove past Mom's old street, the one where the house I built used to stand. The yard was neat, the siding repainted, new cars in the driveway. A stranger's laughter carried across the lawn. It stung, but only briefly. Because what mattered wasn't the house, it was that I had finally stopped letting people decide my worth with dollar signs and guilt. I thought about Michael, about the endless favors, the way he always assumed I'd bend. And I thought about that last moment in the kitchen, the look on his face when I said no and meant it. That was the day I stopped being his safety net. That was the day I chose myself. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need him ruined or humiliated. The bank had already done that work for me. What I needed was distance, peace, and the quiet knowledge that sometimes dignity isn't about winning louder. It's about walking away, bill unpaid.